I did the UK, right? So I managed there and I learned from there pretty quickly. So
Got you.
I think that helped, that experience helped me. By the time I came here, I was 24. So I was a little older. I'd worked a bit. I was a bit streetwise. I mean, you grew up in Nairobi, you're streetwise anyway, right?
Yes.
You grow up in Nairobi, you're streetwise anyway. And you see these amateurs walking around with like their watches and things. You're like, mm-mm. You don't show your watch. If you're wearing a watch, you hide it under your sleeve or you don't even take it with you. You know, you're asking for trouble. So that got dinned into me at a young age. And it's good. It's healthy, I think, in many ways. It just makes you like able to manage and navigate the world. But I would say the biggest thing, you were asking how I was managing, the biggest thing I struggled with was the subway.
Born and raised in the motherland, chasing a better life. Story of an immigrant.
Concrete pastures.
Concrete pastures.
Hello, family. You are watching Concrete Pastures. I am Nancy Mlemwasisi. Oh, I'm so excited today. We have our first Kenyan guest. And before I get into that, I want to thank you for tuning in, and to all of our new listeners watching. Thank you for joining the family. This is your family of your fellow immigrants, your fellow dreamers. We inspire each other through our stories. We also discuss issues that are relevant to us in the diaspora. And today we are talking to an amazing woman. I met her at my brother's house. I know you guys are used to me talking about Raphael. And I wanted to bring her on as our first Kenyan guest. She is known for her work of editing on Anthony Bourdain's season 5. And she is known for her work on The Lost Desert. And she's also known for her work that she's currently working on right now, which we're going to dive into. She can talk about it. I'm not going to mention it. You guys just stay tuned. Let's meet our guest, a little bit about her. Her name is Preet Pannu. She is a professional editor with TV credits for documentary, film, and travel TV featured on PBS, Travel Channel, and Discovery. She has taught in the higher education, delivering instruction to Avid and Premiere Pro, and is an active adjunct instructor at New York Film Academy. With over 21 years of editing expertise, 7 years of producing, and 6 years teaching, her career placements include the United Kingdom, the US of A, and East Africa. She currently resides in my hometown, Brooklyn, New York City. Preet is very competent with post-production for television, documentary film, and digital video and audio. An expert in Avid and Premiere Pro, plus Adobe Creative Cloud. Some of her projects include Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations feature-length documentary Into the Lost Desert, and she currently edits science content for World Science Festival with over 1 million subscribers. Please welcome Preet to the show. Hi, my dear.
Hi, thank you for having me here, neighbor, and it's nice to see you. I'm
Yes.
so glad you found me and that I'm able to address, your wonderful audience and also lend, I guess, a Kenyan view and Kenyan perspective to your show. So thank you. This is wonderful.
I am honored, and I just want to congratulate you on your achievement. And it's definitely an honor to have you here to bless the audience with your with what you have gone through your journey as well.
Of course, absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I think there's not enough in the media of African voices, And when we talk about African voices, we're not just talking about the traditional American view of an African voice, Like
Yes.
I'm an African voice and I don't look like I would be, but I am.
Yes. No,
And
for
I think
sure.
the world needs to change their sort of outlook on what they perceive of Africa to be. And honestly, the media world doesn't give people enough opportunity to see Africa from a different lens and a different perspective. And I think what you're doing is really important in that way. So
Thank you
thank you
so
for what
much.
you do. Yeah.
Thank you. You are from Kenya, and we
Yes,
would like to
ma'am.
know a little bit about you while you were in Kenya, how you grew up, and how you got to come to the US of A.
Of course. It's been a journey, as you said. I grew up in Kenya and I was born there and lived there from until the age of about 18, and then moved on to go to university. But growing up in Kenya was really a blessing because it's such a melting pot, and everybody will tell you that it's a cultural melting pot. So you've got, deep and wonderful and robust Africa itself, right? And we grew up surrounded by Kenyans. That's who my parents' support base was. Like they say, it takes a village to raise a child. That
Yes.
was my parents' village, right? We had Wanjiro and we had Zora and we had all these Kenyans working in our home and supporting my parents. And so I remember one of my very first memories, maybe when I was about 5 years old, outside of our home. We lived in a very sort of suburban neighborhood called Lavington in Nairobi. And outside of our home, just around the fence, there was a little, crop of grass before the road starts. And so we'd all go there. The servants would go there. They'd take their tea and then make, really strong tea with lots of sugar in it. And sometimes there would be ginger in it. And the name for it is sturungi. We call it chai, of course, in Kenya, but this specific tea is called sturungi. And they'd all mix cups of tea and they'd give me one, but it would always be too hot. And they were given these metal mugs. I don't even remember those metal mugs, like to drink it. So the mug is hot too, but they were really careful about, pouring it from mug to mug until it cooled down. And then they gave it to me. And I remember sitting there and sipping this thing. And it was like juice. It was so sweet and sugary and flavorful. And this is one of my memories of Kenya. Until today, here in New York, I invoke that morning ritual and I make my tea with ginger and sugar and I bring back that taste, because it's so important to me and it grounds me and it makes me feel, I'm getting so emotional now. It makes me feel at home.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's good. And that's how my heart is, because my heart is in Kenya in many ways.
Yeah.
So I grew up surrounded by, different cultures as well. My mom is Muslim. My dad is Sikh. So for them to get married back in the day was taboo. They basically eloped to get married. So that was like a big deal back then. I'm losing my makeup.
It's all good. It's all good. I cry a lot of times here.
And so I grew up with Muslim and Sikh culture. But my mom was also raised by nuns. She went to a monastery when she left her home when she was about 11. And she went to school, in Catholic school, and she was there as a boarder. So she was raised as nuns. So I also grew up with Catholicism in my background. So like I said, a melting pot, it very much was that for me, And so we had very deep Indian culture. The Indians who moved to East Africa from India, they maintained their culture in a big way, And when we used to meet people from India, they were like, why are you guys so hardcore Indian? How is that possible? And we're like, I don't know. It's just what happened. People brought themselves to East Africa and they continued who they were. They didn't lose themselves in that, which was wonderful. And East Africa gave us the freedom to do that, the freedom to be who we were, right? There wasn't this level of oppression of like religion and I guess just freedom of thought and speech and things like that. We didn't have that level of oppression and control on us. So we were able to be who we were. And then I also grew up just a little wild. It's Africa, which is amazing. My mom's constant battle with me was put your shoes on. I just didn't want to wear shoes. I'd come home from school. The first thing I'd do was kick off my shoes. I never wanted to have shoes on my feet. And there's pictures of us, my two brothers and I as kids, and we would literally be hanging off the tree in the backyard. That's where we'd hang out and spend our time. That was our Fortnite or YouTube, like the kids do now. And then luckily, my uncle had a farm at the foot of Mount Kenya. So holidays were spent there. Our summers were spent there. And as we grew up, that became like almost summer camp for us. My parents would literally drive us up from Nairobi, drop us off, and then come and visit us, in a couple of weeks and see how we're doing at the farm. And we'd run wild on that farm with the animals. My uncle was a big animal lover, so there was always puppies or kittens or something like that. There was always something for us to like you keep ourselves occupied with, and something super cute for us to hold on to. It was amazing that way. And it was great. The backdrop, of that farm was Mount Kenya, like that postcard picture of Mount Kenya, which was amazing. So I feel really blessed to have had that experience. And those are some of my best memories, definitely spent in Nanyuki. Nanyuki was the village that my uncle had his farm at. And then as I went through high school, things got busier in my life. So I had less and less time to go out to the farm and to Nanyuki, And eventually my uncle had to sell the farm because they got older. His kids weren't interested in necessarily taking over farming.
Yeah.
I think it's the same problem all over the world, right? Farming used to be something that existed in families and got spread out through the lineage, through generations. But less and less younger generations want to go into that. So they have to find other ways to attract people into the farming industry now around the planet. And then it's becoming industrial, of course.
Being an immigrant can be hard. Having been away from my home country for over 20 years has allowed me to experience these hardships firsthand. Throughout my journey, I've had a lot of challenges that were hard to bear. Juggling adjustment to a new country, obtaining my immigration papers, getting married, having children, establishing my career, and finding time for myself. Even though I've always had faith, I also relied on therapy, which gave me the tools to cope with the issues life brought me. My fellow dreamers, let's remove the stigma around therapy and normalize seeking help with today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Go to betterhelp.com/concrete pastures for 10% off your first month of therapy with BetterHelp and get matched with a therapist who will listen and help in as little as 48 hours.
So he sold his farm and then he bought a smaller one at the coast in Kenya, in Malindi. So we used to go and visit him there instead. But we never got that same vibe back, that feeling back that we had at my uncle's farm. And then having gone through high school and everything, the demands get bigger on you. O levels, A levels, you have to study, you have to spend more time there. And then, of course, I got into, just teenage life. Growing up in Nairobi was quite the riot. It was a real party scene. I mean, no one's carding us. You don't have to be 21 to drink. As long as you can go up to a bar and pay for a drink, you get one, So we started like going to the clubs. One of the big ones was the Carnivore, and literally dancing under the African skies. The DJs would play pop music and we'd hang out and we'd drink and dance. And I remember very clearly one of the drinks that came out around when I was about 17 was Sambuca. I don't know if you know this. It's like a Greek sort of, tastes like licorice, this Greek ouzo thing. And you just sort of do a shot of it. It's really syrupy and sweet. But they had different colors of Sambuca. So you could buy like a purple one or a red one or a white one or the yellow one. So we drink this rainbows of Sambuca at night, and you could light them. You could light the top of it on fire, and then you'd lick the palm, and then you'd put it out and then take the shot, So when people ask me now why I don't drink anymore, it's like, well, I started drinking really young, so I kind of got that out of my system. I've been there and done that, like literally. It's all good. And then I got into just like the music scene there. I loved music, and I found that music really sort of filled me and fulfilled me in many ways. And that was something that I continued to do as I came to New York. But having grown up in Kenya, the trajectory was, you got to get out. Everybody was like, okay, you got to go away for your education. The universities here are not reliable. They're not that good. And during that time, universities would often shut down. There'd be some sort of, strike or a protest, or, there'd be lack of funding or something like that. So it was obvious that I wasn't going to be able to further my education in Kenya. And it was always the idea that you're going to go to the UK to study. So I did my applications, I ended up getting into the University of Sheffield and doing business studies and economics there in Sheffield in the UK. And I went basically to the UK not knowing how to do my own laundry. Of course, I grew up, pampered in Nairobi,
Of course.
never having like, I guess maybe cooked a meal or ironed anything, right? Never having signed a check or opened a bank account with a fortune of money that's supposed to get me through my year in university and also my fees, because that was a little fortune, and it came as a banker's check and some of it is cash, from my dad. So I'm there my first day at the University of Sheffield, at the Students' Union, looking around, completely clueless and not realizing how clueless I was. But as the weeks went by, I was like, okay, I know absolutely nothing. And I didn't know how to turn on the washing machine. I couldn't understand where to put the coins in, all of that kind of stuff. But we learned, we figured it out,
Yeah.
And our parents they trusted. I mean, I wouldn't trust my kids and throw them out to another country without having really, really grounded them. But that's the generational, gap between us. It's a different mindset. This was the 80s when I was young and I was growing up, and then early 90s when I was sent to college. So parenting was different then, and they're like, we've taught you, we spent a lot of money on you, you've been to school, you're educated and you're smart, you'll figure it out. And we did. I had one friend who came with me from Kenya, Alvin, RIP Alvin, never forget him.
Oh.
And he's such a funny guy. He just copied everything I did. So when I started applying for universities, like, where are you applying? Preet, where are you going to apply? Kenyan guy, tall, and he had that typical box haircut, and so he just sort of mimicked everything I did, and we got into the same university together. So I wasn't alone being clueless. I was clueless with Alvin. So yeah, I ended up in the UK, and from there I ended up going back to Kenya once I graduated. I always wanted to go back home and work there. And I worked in a bank, and I realized that I had no idea what work was and what banking would be like in Africa. I thought I'd be on a computer, number one, because computers were just starting to come out. We had email at that point. I remember getting my very first Hotmail account, and that's how I was keeping in touch, with friends I'd made at university. And so my first day at the bank, I was waiting for them to show me my desk. And my desk was at a table with a whole bunch of other accountants. And we were like sort of sat at a rectangular table, all facing each other, into each other. And I was like, okay. And I was waiting for a computer to show up or something. What I got was one of those old school accounting calculators with the ticker tape on it, and a ledger, a giant ledger that went boom and was like just slapped in front of me, in which I would open and then literally physically consolidate accounts. I was like, whoa, okay, this is not what I thought banking would be. And so I survived somehow that role for about 6 months, but always with the thought of, I need to move on. I need to do something else. Maybe I need to get involved in the tourism industry, because that was something that was always big. Of course, in Kenya, in East Africa, it's huge, and it still is today. But as I did that, every morning I had this ritual of like reading the newspaper. And as we read the paper, the fruit lady would come by, and she'd have these little Tupperware containers that she's made fruit salad in. And it was the best fruit salad ever. I don't know, the fruit in Africa, there's nothing like it. Nowhere in the world does it come close to it. I've even had fruit in maybe Jamaica, some of the local stuff there, but I've even had fruit in Mexico, and honestly, it just doesn't come close. And so this amazing mouth-watering, fruit salad in the morning would be my breakfast. And I remember eating that and reading the paper. And one day I came across an ad which was asking people to audition for a new radio station that was starting. So I thought, okay, I'll go along for the audition. And so I did. I went along the following Sunday, did the audition, and I got the job. I ended up working on radio in Nairobi for a year. And I opened up and launched the radio station because my show was the very first one to go on air. I remember my first show, I was so nervous, and I was co-hosting because they were easing me into it and training me still. And I was with Paul Olding, who'd come from the UK, and he'd run a radio station in the UK for a little while. So Paul was the main host, and I was sort of co-hosting with Paul. And for the first half an hour, the only word this poor guy could get out of me was, yep, yep, because I was so nervous. He's like, so Preet, this is your first day on radio. Yep. And he's like, oh my gosh, you have to say more than that. So as he played the song, he's like, Preet, you're sounding more and more like a bird than a human being. You have to say some words. I was like, okay. And the way we cracked through that was, at one point I stood up and I started walking about and pacing, as the music was playing in between songs. And when he talked to me, I walked up to the mic and I was still standing. And that's when I could speak. Suddenly I was able to talk, and I was able to get my nerves out because I used my body and my energy to just sort of, get those nerves out.
Yeah.
So I realized that's what I need to do. And I ended up delivering most of my radio shows standing, because that's what helped me just manage my, voice, my words and everything. And it made me sound more animated, I guess, when I was reading the news or when I was delivering something. For the news, I would actually sit because it would calm down my voice and make it more, level. And then for just like regular presenting or introducing songs or talking to people on the phone and stuff who would call in, I would stand up for that. So it was a wonderful experience. And I realized then that media was my thing. Yes, I have a background in business, but I didn't know if I was going to be successful pursuing that path. And especially that it's something that seemed to have bored me to death. But of course, that banking experience, kind of put me off. And I knew I had to do something else with my life. So I pursued media, and that's what got me here to New York. I came here to study my master's in media and at the New School. So that's what brought me to this big, wonderful, mad city. And when I first came here, I thought, okay, I'm just going to get my credentials. And the idea was always to go back to Kenya and live there. But I came here and I got stuck. And here I am, like almost 22 years later, still in New York, still in Brooklyn.
Wow.
You never know where life's going to take you. Not to
No.
say that I've left Kenya behind. Like, you can't never leave Africa behind when you're an African.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, I always go back at any opportunity I get.
I applaud you for realizing what your passion is early on in your career, because a lot of us, because of our parents and how I guess our culture is, banking was like a prestigious job for you to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have your degrees, and when you have a banking job back home, it's just like you have arrived. So many people want to be in your shoes, and for you just to, I this is not for me. I'm going to go into media, and this is what I'm connected to. I applaud you for that. It's really great.
Thank you. It was tough to get my parents on board too, because of course, like you said, for them, it was become a banker, a doctor, a lawyer, those were the paths.
All of us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The careers you should have. Nothing media. You can't feed people with media. How it's
No,
going to work?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you get to New York. How was the adjustment period? I know you were in New York, in the UK, and then now the US. I'm sure there should be some differences on how things are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd always had this romantic vision of coming to the US growing up, like speaking of media, everything we watched, we consumed, we listened to when we were teenagers was from here. MTV came out and our worlds were blown wide open. You remember when MTV came out? Oh my gosh, that was amazing. And then I watched all these movies like with Prince and, Lost Boys and Stand By Me, and then all these, like, I guess the Stephen King horrors and stuff that came out as well. But it just made New York and America seem so wonderful and such a place of like freedom and possibility. So when I came here, I was filled with that, with that sentiment of like freedom and possibility. And the world is your oyster. You know, you can be and do anything you want to. And my first few weeks, I remember walking around New York and thinking, I feel like I'm in a movie. Like it felt so familiar, but a world that I'd never been in, but I knew, you know, in that sense. And there were certain places that you'd recognize literally from scenes in films, you know, like Taxi Driver and stuff like that.
Yes.
So it was really cool, I have to say, being in New York, and it was really surreal. Every now and then I'd pinch myself and be like, it's not a dream. And so I was living with a friend of a friend's in her apartment, and I knew another very close friend of mine from Kenya had just moved to the US, but she was in California. She was in Torrance in California.
Mm.
And it's sort of like outside of LA. It's very car oriented. She didn't have a car, and she felt so stuck and stranded. And I'm like, just come to New York. I have no car. You don't need a car here. You know, I still don't have a car. All this time, I've never had a car in New York, and it's never slowed me down or held me back. And I told her that, I'm like, just come. And so on a whim, she did. And her name is Sagal. So we ended up living together here. And again, I had a partner in crime. Just like I had Alvin in Sheffield, I had Sagal in New York. And
Yeah.
she's now actually come back full circle. She went to Kenya and she's come back now to New York. So I'll be able to connect you with her, because she's got an interesting story as
Oh,
well for
yes,
you.
please. Thank you.
She'd be wonderful to speak to.
Oh, for
But
sure.
I remember having so little here, even less than I had in Kenya. And my parents would have felt a little heartbroken if they'd seen my life here in the beginning in New York. They would have felt sad for me, you know? But I felt like I had so much. So we shared a room, and we shared a futon bed. And we rented a room from this couple in Murray Hill. And when you opened the door would hit the bed. So you couldn't even get the door of the room wide open. And we shared a tiny strip of a cupboard, and the rest of our clothing and stuff, you know, we'd rotate. So we have seasons here, as you know.
Yes.
So we'd have our clothes for just that season in the closet, and the rest would be in storage somewhere. And we lived in that same bed together for like a year, never once had an argument, never once had an issue or a clash, just somehow in harmony with each other, and we're more than happy, you know? And
Wow.
didn't feel like we needed any more than that. And experienced just the wonder of this city. Every day was an adventure, because Manhattan, we were in Manhattan, of course. As you know, every neighborhood has something new and different to explore and offer you. And then there are all these little subcultures you can get into in New York. You know, for example, we met this wonderful guy who Sagal ended up dating. His name is Herbie. And Herbie was a fencer. He was into fencing.
Yeah.
And he was going to represent the US in the Olympics at one point, but he had an injury, so couldn't make it. But we got into this fencing thing with him. And then he introduced us to the house music scene. And specifically Club Shelter and Body and Soul. And sort of it's house music, but it's house music from a very Black perspective. You know, it's soulful.
Nice.
And it's also got this sort of gospel house music.
Oh,
and when we
nice.
started going, we'd show up at the club at 10 and, you know, would hang out, and Herbie would be like, no, this is amateurish. We're like, why? What do you mean? He's like, no, you guys have to come to the club at 4 a.m. I was like, what are you talking about? How are we going to have a drink at 4? You're like, it's not about the alcohol and the drinking and stuff. You come here to dance and to get into the spirit of house. So this guy schooled us on how to experience house music. And Herbie would literally wake us up at 3 a.m. We get changed, and we would go to the club at 4 a.m. for when the real DJs would come on, like Timmy Regisford. He's still playing, by the way, till today.
Wow.
Timmy Regisford is playing in New York, and you can still see him. A lot of those old house DJs, you know, we've lost some of them during the pandemic and before, because they're older now. But we would literally go to the club at 4 a.m. and some of that music sounded like, you know, gospel. It sounded like, and it would be referring to, you know, spirituality and creator. And it was all in the spirit of love and togetherness. And you would see every kind of human being in that club. You know, the club wasn't completely packed. It's 4 a.m. it's emptied out a bit now. You're not squashed like sardines. Like a lot of places can be really tight and squashed in New York, and
Yes.
you want to bust a move, but you just can't quite get into it because people's shoulders are right next to you. But here we had like space to roam around and move, and there's every walk of life around you and every spectrum of the age group. You know, you'd have young people and you'd have people all the way with like gray hair. So it was wonderful being in New York. And then of course I love my course. I thrived. I definitely found the thing for me. And it was so good to the point where I was getting scholarships, academic scholarships, because I was just, nailing my classes and everything. And I think that helped my parents be like, okay, she's doing the right thing now. She seems to
How are you managing that 4 o'clock clubbing and then schooling at the new school? By the way, I actually worked with the new school with the international students. So this immigrant thing, I realized the other day, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't really start right now. I've been doing this work for a while. Because I did
absolutely.
and the new school, I used to work very closely with them, the international side, because the same way you were explaining that you didn't know how to write a check, you didn't know. So when the students come here, they don't know all of that. The banking or America, it's different from where we come from. So I was the person that was teaching them those ropes, how to open up an account and all that good stuff. So really, really good. How are you managing?
Yeah, well, I did the UK, right? So I managed there and I learned from there pretty quickly. So I think that experience helped me. By the time I came here, I was 24. So I was a little older. I'd worked a bit. I was a bit streetwise. I mean, you grew up in Nairobi, you're streetwise anyway, right?
Yes.
You grow up in Nairobi, you're streetwise anyway. And you see these amateurs walking around with like their watches and things. You're like, you don't show your watch. If you're wearing a watch, you hide it under your sleeve, or you don't even take it with you. You're asking for trouble. So that got dinned into me at a young age. And it's good. It's healthy, I think, in many ways. It just makes you like able to manage and navigate the world. But I would say the biggest thing, you were asking how I was managing, the biggest thing I struggled with was the subway. Because I just thought it's going to be like London. I spent time in London. The tube system it's very organized. It's intuitive. What the map says, the train does. It's as simple as that. And you can tell which direction you're going in. In New York, it was like you either knew it or you don't. And you can either hear this guy on this crackly speaker and understand what he's saying, or it's just gibberish. Like in the beginning, I couldn't even understand what they were saying when they were announcing stuff, because first of all, the audio in the trains were really bad. I think these trains were built in the 70s and those speakers were from then. Now they've upgraded things. It's different.
Thank God.
Oh my gosh. And then the accents, and sometimes it's a Jamaican accent, sometimes it's an Indian accent. Like it's never going to be the accent that you're ready for that day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't predict who's going to get on that speaker and talk to you. And then the worst thing, or the worst and best thing about New Yorkers is their confidence. So when you ask for directions, people will be like, oh yeah, they go here and you go there and you'll turn left and you go right and you'll find it. I'm like, okay, great. But that person had no clue where you were going. They just gave you the direction with confidence, and they direct you somewhere completely wrong, even though you followed it exactly. People just want to act like they know stuff here.
I'm laughing because I went through the same exact thing. I would ask for direction. The confidence that the people just give you direction.
Yes.
You follow it exactly and you lost completely. And then I had to go back to where I started from.
Exactly.
Ask somebody else.
That's how it goes.
Wow.
That's the New Yorker for you. They will tell you, like, they will talk to you as if they know it, like they've been knowing it for millennia. This information, this is old. I know it forever. And then when you follow that information, you're like, yo, that guy didn't know anything. So that's what I struggled with the most. But once I understood the system, I knew my routines, my routes, everything. I was fine. You just do it sort of blindfolded. And even the weekend, I'd accidentally, if I'm going somewhere else, I'd accidentally find myself heading to university just on autopilot. I'm like, I didn't want to go here. I wasn't planning to show up at Union Square again. Why did I end up here? It's because you're on autopilot and you're just going through the role of that system. But I love the energy of New York. And you asking me, how are you going to the club at 4 in the morning? I was working at 2 a.m. until 2 a.m. at the university. I was working at the computer lab. And then after that, we'd hang out and then go to the club, sort of thing, you know? And I wouldn't sleep much. My first year, I just didn't sleep much. I didn't need to, you know? I was just infused by the energy and the vibe of the city. And I knew, yes, you're going to burn out. You can't sustain that forever.
Yeah.
And what made me realize that I needed balance with my life was when we came and we visited a friend who's actually a writer, and he used to write for different hip hop magazines. Oh, I forget. Maybe The Source. Was it The Source? One of the hip hop magazines? Yeah. So we came and visited him in Brooklyn, and he'd thrown a party. And Herbie, the fencer, was also a DJ. So he was DJing at the party. And we got a taste of Brooklyn. And we're like, hey, Brooklyn feels more like home, you know? There's more people, you know what we mean? Like more flavor,
Yes.
more people like us.
More
And
diverse. Yeah.
exactly. And then there's house party scene, you know, which we love. And then there's like just a little more space, and it's a little more quiet in the mornings. You don't wake up to like sirens and F you, and you know, that's Manhattan. Like literally that scene from Coming to America with Eddie Murphy when he wakes up in the morning. That's waking up in Manhattan. But waking up in Brooklyn was a little more zen and peaceful, you know. Yeah, there's a garbage truck or whatever, but it's not going to be this constant barrage of noise and craziness. And we decided we were going to move to Brooklyn. And once we did, we found our balance, our chill zone. So there were some days, you know, we just chill out and sleep and nap and hang out. And then there's some days when we're pushing through it. And that's where we came to like that level of balance. I think if I'd continued to live in Manhattan the whole time, I would have had a little bit of burnout. And I did go back to live in Manhattan for a few years after that, but having understood, you know, needing that balance, in that work-life balance, that's what helped me sort of manage things. And yeah, from there I just started, you know, going with the flow in New York and going with the flow of what came at me socially and then career-wise. I ended up DJing because I had always been into music, and I learned from my cousin who was a DJ in the UK what to do and how to do it. And so I spent a good chunk of my student loan, my first student loan, on my turntables. And so I started doing those house parties in Brooklyn, which was awesome. And then Herbie would come along, and you know, he'd also bring these giant speakers when Herbie would show up, and that's when you knew, okay, the party was on. And when we knew we'd had a really good party was when the cops would come and try and shut us down because we were making too much noise. So it's been amazing. And that's something I hope I eventually go back into, because my friend Suggle, she always teased me. When I had my children, she's like, Preet's now switched her turntables for diaper changing tables. I was like, oh, don't say it like that. So one day I want to get back into that. Once my kids are ready, and it feels like saying mom is a DJ it's respectable. It's not like weird for them, you know?
How old are they now?
14 and 10. Yeah.
Nice. So you
Two
still got
boys.
a little long way to go
Yes. Yes.
for to party. But once you start turning, I'll be showing up and turning up as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, of course.
That's another thing I love about New York, and you have to agree. Don't you feel like there's no limit on your capabilities in terms of your age in New
Oh,
York?
no. There's no limit at all whatsoever. You could start from 50, 60, 70, whatever you want.
Exactly.
There's no, it's never too late for us. Like nothing is okay. You are grown now. No, we don't have that.
Exactly. It's amazing. That's what I like about New York, you know. I used to hang out with my college professors, and you know, they were older in their 60s, gray-haired, and they just seemed like they were the same. They felt like they were the same age as us, you know.
Yeah.
And I love that New York sort of keeps you going, keeps you young, and lets you engage in things that you have a passion for. And you don't have to feel like I'm too old to do this. You know, I'm too old to go to the club. I just recently went, by the way, I went to see Black Coffee on Saturday.
Nice.
On Sunday, sorry, at Brooklyn Mirage, and it was amazing. He was amazing. And I don't think I would have necessarily done things like that if I was still in Kenya, you know? I would
There's,
have felt like
I
I've
don't know
aged
why
out of it.
it's like that back home.
I
Like
don't
after
know.
you have
Yeah,
kids, that's it, you're done. You're done
right.
playing. You're just done playing. You can't be a child anymore. You can't have the childlike mindset. Everything is grown, grown, grown. Uh, mm, that's why I love New York. And I want to go. I'll go back to you living in the city and Manhattan. I worked in Manhattan for 13 years. I loved it because again, I can relate to you. Every um from downtown to the west side to everywhere around Manhattan, there's like something different to experience.
Right.
And I worked like almost all over Manhattan and I was experiencing it, enjoying it every single day, new building or uh people from everywhere. And God forbid you even go to Harlem. Forget it. Harlem feels like home for me. Being that it's all Africans most that are populated in Harlem, and when you get there, that's why I started with banking. It I felt at home. Those were my customers, and I would just they would wait for me. They would come visit. Hey, even though we're not from the same country, but it just felt home. We could relate. We are all immigrants, but we are from the same continent, and we just felt great all of this.
Absolutely. Like when you in a cab and the cab driver
Oh
happens
yes.
Senegal. I mean, anywhere. Pick anywhere on the map on the continent of
Yeah.
Africa, and you say you're from Kenya. There's this immediate connection. You know, they're like,
Yeah.
you get it, or they'll say something like, "You're my sister." You know, they'll say something like
Yes,
that.
for sure.
There's this immediate sort of bond that happens between you, and this recognition of like, okay, I know where you're from, and I know how you feel being here. You know, it's a wonderful thing.
Oh, I love it. New York is amazing. And the fact that we can find even the celebrities, because when I worked in the city, sometimes on the corner, just passing by, they're filming.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
Literally,
beautiful.
the corners of Manhattan are like from a movie scene, and
Yes,
they're set up. You see like everybody with their craft services and their big lights and everything. You're like, okay, there's a film going on here.
yes,
Yeah.
or a show, whatever it is.
Which
And
is which is one of your top celebrity sightings.
11th Ave, because I worked on 11th
Yeah.
Avenue. So I would have like Alec Baldwin pass by. So many people would pass by, and then Law and Order used to film there.
Okay.
And then there was another show, geez, I'm forgetting, but there was so many like uh movies and shows showing up on that corner for some reason.
Right.
11th and University all the time because also the housing, the type of housing that's there, everybody just like used to come there.
That's so cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
Um, so I want to get into your career.
uh-oh.
There's so much to learn. There's so much insight that you can give to so many people around the world that could learn from your experience. And you've definitely put in some work from Kenya to here. And what was it like for you working on Anthony Bourdain? I'm a huge fan. I was devastated when I heard the news. I even remember where I was. We were driving across America for vacation, and then the news broke. I was very depressed with that. I was very disappointed, but this life. How was
It's a
that?
big loss for the world, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember that day I was in Nairobi, actually. I'd
Mm,
moved to Kenya for a year with my sons. So I'd taken my sons to Kenya for a year. I wanted to put them in school there and have them experience, life in Africa and where I was from, and also have a different perspective on the world. I didn't want them to
yeah.
just grow up completely 100% American and not knowing that this gets done differently and elsewhere, and you have people elsewhere and you have family and you have a home in Africa. So I wanted them to feel that connection. But anyway, I was just driving around Nairobi, heading back to my parents' place, and I got a text from a friend who knew I was working on the show, and he's like, "Did you see what happened? Did you hear what happened?" I'm like, no. And then I started researching further, and I saw that we'd lost Anthony Bourdain. So working with him was a privilege, you know. I have to say, very grateful to have had that experience. This show, Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, was done in such a beautiful way. If you watch this a series, you'll see that every single episode is unique. It's not cookie cutter. It's not
No.
edited in a way that you'll think, okay, this is what's going to happen. Like, for example, I don't know, The Floor is Lava or Nailed It, or one of those shows. They're cookie cutter. Each episode is edited in a very specific way. The way Anthony Bourdain was done, one editor was in charge of each show, a different editor. And so they would bring their own sort of unique perspective to it. Like if it was a show in Japan, they would start off the beginning with like some anime sort of comic book, you know, storyboard kind of thing, which would be, you know, rooted in Japan, and they'd play Japanese music, and they'd really bring you into that country, you know, using its culture and using the art from that country specifically. Or if it was France, you'd hear more sort of French music, and you'd see like calm, beautiful, sexy, you know, French countryside and champagne and things like that. And Bourdain was just, he was an excellent writer. He just had this ability to like immediately put a script to paper without even having to like, you know, get a forewarning or time or whatever. The way the edits were approached is we would rough cut a particular episode. So say I was working on the Panama episode, we'd rough cut it and record our own voice, record what we called a scratch track, and we'd write our own version of narration just to make it flow. And then we'd send that version to Tony, to Anthony Bourdain, and Tony would take a look at it, and he'd write his own narration, he'd record his voice, and he'd send it back to us. And it would just be next level. You know, he would add his personality into it. He was very self-deprecating. If you remember him, he would just be very honest about himself. And then he would add his own perspective on that country. And he would also root it in some sort of historical background on that country, or what's happening in that country at the time politically or something like that. So it wouldn't just be about food and travel, you know, it would be like all-encompassing: food, travel, culture, politics in the country, what it's like to live there, and that kind of thing. It was amazing. It was really an amazing experience. And I did get to meet him a couple of times.
Oh,
and
nice.
he's literally the personality you see on camera. He didn't put on an air and become something when the camera was turned on. That is Tony, 100%. That was him. You know, he'd just be like kind of brash and a bit blatantly honest, and he'd be like, well, what have you done to your hair? Well, why did you do that? Well, I liked it the other way, you know, like just really New York in that sense too, you know, harsh but honest. And that's one thing, again, I love about New York, is that you always know where you stand with people. No one's pretending, no one's faking it. No one's trying to be pretentious about who they are. They're just like blatant, you know. And that was Tony. Like, he had this spirit of New York in him in many ways, I would say. But, you know, he had a dark past. Like, if you read some of his books, trying to remember, Kitchen Confidential is one of them. And he talks about the celebrity chef world and just the chef world. And it's really a grind. You know, we talked about how I came to New York and hardly slept. He never slept. The hours he worked, the demands on his body and stuff. And so they got into things that try and keep them up and to try and keep them energetic and moving. And he got into the drug scene, specifically heroin. And that's what rewired his brain in many ways. When you become an addict, especially for something like heroin, you sort of block your body's abilities to like create certain feelings, especially endorphins, to just help release happiness and joy in your body. Your body can no longer do that because the drug started doing that for you. And so your body gave up doing it and stopped doing it altogether. So when you get off it and you get clean, you lose that ability to just feel joy and happiness in your life. And I think that's something that put him in that pit of darkness that he was in. I mean, I don't know for sure.
Yes.
It happened to him, but in my mind, he rewired his brain's chemistry, and I think that's what sort of brought him down in the end, you know. You
Wow.
look at his life, and anybody would, and they'd be like, if I had that life, I would be so grateful, and I would never ever, you know, do anything to like disrespect that experience, you know. And some
Yeah.
people look at him taking his own life as like an fu to the world and an fu to like all this stuff, all this amazing opportunities that he had. But I don't think he saw it that way. I
No.
just, I think for him it was just like, I can't go on, you know.
Yeah.
Just can't go on. And you know, some stars shine too brightly and they dim quickly. That's kind of what happens in the world, right?
Yeah. No, I just love how great he was a storyteller. I still watch, like I recently went to Mexico and I was on the plane literally uh, watching him. And he's very captivating in the way he told the story of any country he went to. And last night I was watching, because of the interview, I was like, oh, let me see which season she did, meaning you did, which is season 5. And I was watching when he was in Australia, Vietnam, Mexico, and my heart again just when I'm like, oh, gone too soon.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. We lost someone very special, and he was a wordsmith as well. His writing was amazing. He's put books out there. So if you want to pursue, you know, and delve into his background a little more, he does write about his background in the culinary world in New York, and sort of being at the top of that scene, what that was like. You know, it's quite
yeah,
amazing. And he just had the gift of putting words together and building a world with his words. It's amazing, really amazing. So working on that show, I learned a lot. You know, I used to work, the way I got in was I agreed to work the night shift called the swing shift. And I would go in at 5 p.m. and then keep working until about 3 or 4 a.m. It was very intense. So I started as a junior editor and then sort of, you know, rose up through that. It was tough. And I also had a toddler at that point. My son was about 18 months old. So that was tough. It was tough times. But it was worth it because honestly, it does feel like one of the highlights of my career. I hope there'll be more. You
there's
know, have
definitely going
done
to be
something like
more.
that. Yeah.
No, there's definitely going to be more. I mean, you have the desert, the Lost Desert.
Yes.
That's also huge.
That was a very cool documentary to work on. Yeah. And the character, he's Max Calderon is a wonderful guy. It was out on Tubi, so you used to be able to watch it for free, but our subscription there has finished. So I
Yeah.
think they're going to release it in another channel soon. So I hope so. I'll watch the space. I'll let you know. But yeah, Max is this Italian character, but he's an Italian character who has such deep love for the Arabic world, and he
Yeah.
speaks fluent Arabic, and then he also prays from the Quran. So there's this one scene where he does get lost at night in a sandstorm in the desert, and he has a camera with him, so he's shooting it himself, and he just starts you know, the Islamic prayer to help him get through this sandstorm, but he's also at the same time speaking in English, and he's like talking to the desert. The desert that he's in is called the Rub al Khali, and he's talking to the desert and he's saying, please allow me to, you know, pass through you peacefully. I just came here to see to experience your spirit and your beauty, you know. So he speaks to the desert as if it's a person that way. It's amazing. It's really wonderful. So Max is an extreme explorer, and he spent a lot of his life running and exploring deserts, doing marathons in deserts. So his dream was to cross the empty quarter of the Arabian desert, and that's what this documentary does. It follows him on his journey, his extreme journey through the desert. I'm glad I wasn't on the production crew for that one. We lost a lot of cameras and stuff just because of the dust, and
Yes,
days
I
were
can
hot and nights
imagine.
were freezing. It was extreme temperatures, you know, in the desert. And then there was a lot of men, so I think it would have been quite sweaty and stinky. I'm glad I was on the receiving end of the footage, just waiting in an office in New York to get the footage.
What is your process when you are getting you get a footage for you to edit. What is your process? Like, where do you go to? There's so many creators in all over the world in the diaspora that are working to do this work that you do. What is your process? Maybe somebody can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would get the raw footage. For example, Anthony Bourdain, let's talk about that one because it's TV show based.
Yes.
And I would get 80 hours of footage. This was on tape back then. Now you no longer get tape. You'd probably get a disc or something to put in, a SAN disc or something like that, an SD card or something, but I would get it on tape. And the first process, of course, is to just like digitize everything, put everything in a usable format in your computer, and then start labeling everything. Being organized is something that helps me get to where I need to be. And then watching everything. I feel like these editing programs now are so easy. You can immediately start cutting and putting stuff together, and it's so simple to drop, copy and paste and throw things into a timeline and start, creating something. But I always urge my students, even when I teach editing, don't start cutting anything until you've watched everything. Watch every single thing you have. It's such a simple, like logical thing to do, but people skip that step, Watch it all as you go, make, mental notes or write it down if it's a lot of footage, which clip is where, and then start organizing sub bins. So you have what we call bins in the editing world, which literally referred to, now those bins are digital, but it referred to when we used to get film on a reel back in the day. And those reels would come in a bin to an editor, and the bin would be delivered. And then we'd take those reels and cut them with razor blades and, stick them with glue. That's how films were originally made. So that concept of bins still exists, in the editing world. And once you do that, once you start organizing things, you will have a bin of, your A-roll, the main footage you're going to use, which is your talent talking to the camera, or Anthony Bourdain speaking, Anthony Bourdain talking to people and interviewing people. Then you would have what's called your B-roll, which is your cutaway shots. And within that, you have B-roll of, the country that you're visiting, or the city that you're in. You'd have B-roll of the traveling that's happening, because sometimes you see him en route and traveling to different places. And you would have B-roll of food prep, like food being prepared and cooked.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, the good shots of the food would be called food porn. We'd call that food porn. And we'd have a bin of food porn. So if there was a beautiful, like a gorgeous shot of food, that would go in the food porn bin, basically. And that's how you'd cut it. And then I approached things, and I was very fortunate to have a background in radio. I approach things as, a radio from a radio perspective. So I do what's called a radio cut, and that term exists in the industry. I cut the story first. And it's something that has a very rich narrative, and you can close your eyes and listen to it, and you're engaged. And that's when I know I've got a good piece together. After I do the radio cut, that's when I go and start thinking of the visuals. And that's when I go into my B-roll and all my cutaway shots, and I start putting those in to make it visually rich now. But you start with the base, and it's like layers in an onion, you just keep layering it up and peeling it off until you get to that perfect core in the middle. So that's pretty much my process. And then after I've done a cut, I always get somebody else to watch it, because as an editor, you're so close to it, you can't necessarily see everything, even if I'm working from home remotely now, even if it's just to get my son to come and watch something, I'm like, just watch this and tell me what you think. Let me know if you see anything out of place. He's like, oh, Mom, do I have to? And then, but once he starts watching it, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. What was that? That looked weird there. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That effect didn't work out properly, or something like that. Like, he will notice something that I can no longer see because I've been watching it so much, and my mind's already predicting what I'm going to see, Like if you watch a movie twice in a row, you go to the cinema, the second time you watch the movie, there are things that your mind already fills in, and it's going to come, you anticipate it, your brain fills it in for you. So that's one thing I would really recommend to people, is have somebody review it with you. That always helps. And then, get their feedback, and then you will also see it from their perspective. Believe it or not, you will see it in a different light. You will see it as if, what's an audience looking at here, and does it make sense? can anybody sit here and watch it and understand what's happening? Yeah, that would be
I
my
love your
personal
passion. I love your passion. It's coming through, and your experience as well is coming through. And a lot of people are going to appreciate um, just this knowledge that you're providing us. This is really, really great. I'm
Thank
sitting here, I'm already thinking also what I'm going to do for the podcast, because it's the same things. I'm just like, oh my goodness. So you are currently working, you go back and forth to Kenya, right?
I do. Well, I travel to Kenya. But at the moment, I'm working a couple of places. You know, they're all sort of freelance roles. So, like I said, World Science Studios, one place that I'm working with. They
Yes.
haven't had enough work for me lately, so I've taken on other projects. I'm working with this guy who is another sort of not really an Anthony Bourdain character. It's funny. He's kind of a mix between Bourdain and Max Calderon from Into the Lost Desert.
Oh, wow.
He runs different, you know, in different countries. He runs these very particular journeys that have some sort of significance, whether it's historical significance or cultural significance. So, for example, the episode or the season I'm editing right now is on Cuba, and he runs from Santa Clara to Havana, which is the trip that Fidel Castro and Che Guevara took after they ousted Batista in Santa Clara, and then they went from Santa Clara to Havana to take over the country. And so he's going to run, and he runs and walks that journey. And I'm, you know, editing a couple of episodes for Ryan at the moment. And his website is runwithryan.org. So I'm doing that. But I also like to keep a foothold in the education world and, you know, impart my knowledge. As I'm an educator, as you can tell, I like to, you know, sort of
Yes.
share what I know. And why not? If I can get, if I can get you a little further in life, why not? And
Oh,
especially if you're an African. So now I'm working with a nonprofit group in Kenya. They're called Leo Local, and they're based in Nanyuki, which is where my uncle's farm was. So I feel like I've come around full circle. And so
definitely.
I'm helping people there learn media literacy. And I think now it's something that our world needs. And it's really sad that we're not teaching this in schools at the moment. You know, everybody needs to learn media literacy. It should be a mandated course starting from middle school to high school. You know, how to navigate the digital world, how to manage, you know, your life with having a device that is constantly demanding your attention, how to sort of just assimilate information. We're bombarded with information 24/7. Kids more so because of all the apps and things, and, you know, the different sites that they're on. And so how do you parse down that information? And the course I'm teaching is spotting fake news, how to know the difference between fake and real news, and where you should get your news from. Honestly, I'm teaching people not to get their news from social media, because that's a habit now. That's a habit that people have formed. They think, oh, I'll go to Facebook and somebody says something about the news and that's news. It's not. It's not news if you don't know who sent it. And if that voice that sent it isn't a journalist, it is definitely not news. So it's something simple like, I asked the participants, do you have phones? Everyone's like, yes, pretty much everyone. Even in Kenya, they all have phones. Where do you get your news from? And they would say, oh, Facebook, Twitter, you know. I'm like, but if you have a phone, why don't you have the BBC app? Why don't you have the CNN app on your phone? Oh, because I have to pay for it. I'm like, no. Those apps are free. If you can get Facebook on your phone, you can get CNN or BBC on your phone. From now onwards, when you're looking at news, look there. That's one way not to become a victim or a target of fake news and not to spread fake information, right?
Yes.
You go to the source. And then I also tell them, for balance sake, I usually put Al Jazeera on my phone, because if there's news that comes out of the Arab world, I like to get a balanced perspective. I don't want Americans telling me about what's happening in the Arab world. They're saying it from their perspective. I go to Al Jazeera to see that balance.
Yeah.
But Al Jazeera also offers this perspective that you wouldn't necessarily see elsewhere, you know, because news media at the end of the day is biased. So if you look at two polar sources, somewhere in the middle lies the real thing, right? So that's what I love doing. I'm really enjoying that course. I'm not getting paid a penny for it. I'm a volunteer. And honestly, it's what's giving me the most fulfillment right now. So I feel like where I'm headed is, doing more of that. I would love to get more and more involved in media and information literacy. And it's a movement that's sorely needed everywhere. But I think if I can make an impact in Africa, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I was going to say it's very fulfilling when you are just doing it just to do it. And because it gives back to you the amount of gratitude that the community that you are helping is giving you, that's fulfillment right there.
Yeah, 100%. That's
Yeah.
so true. That's so true.
Yeah, no, really, really nice. Sorry, I keep my
It's that
throat.
time of year, my love, we all have like sore throats and it's getting cold. And honestly, seeing the Kenyan sitting there in the sunshine, I'm like envious on the Zoom.
Oh
On the
my
Zoom
God.
the other day, I was like, oh my gosh, you guys have wonderful weather.
Where do you see I recently asked this question to Dr. Bukhari. He's Burkinabe and he's into cinema and film as well. He wrote the book on Africans in Harlem, The Untold Story of New York. And I asked him this question, where does he see cinema in Africa or media itself in Africa? Because this is your world. Where do you see that, like in the future?
I think right now it's coming into a zone where there's more outlets for African media to get out. It's going to be, it's easier. You can just release a movie on YouTube. Yeah, you may not make all the money you want to make, but you can get an audience and you can get it out there. Maybe you have an Africa theatrical release where it's released in like, the movie theaters and stuff there, but you have a YouTube release and you can even do it, it's paid. There's paid media on YouTube now. People have to pay like $3.99 or whatever it is to rent a film and stuff like that. So there's a lot more opportunity. There's definitely a lot more opportunity there. I think that we have to have more voices from the continent. Definitely, we don't have enough. We're starting to see now Netflix shows come up, Netflix series. What some of them are based in Nairobi. They're shot and edited in Nairobi, which I love. Nigeria has always been really big on churning out, films. It's at the level of Bollywood, they churn out more films in Nigeria and Bollywood, Nollywood and Bollywood than they do in Hollywood. So the talent is not missing. There's no lack of expertise and talent and knowledge there. I think it's what's been holding them back is other voices that are bigger. It's being drowned out by Western media and Western content. But I think now people are waking up and paying attention. I mean, look at Black Coffee. He's the biggest, he's the DJ god now, and he's from South Africa. He's homegrown.
Yeah.
He's not from Berlin and he's not from America or somewhere like that. And so when people like that get a platform, in some ways they have a responsibility to support local artists. And Black Coffee, I have to say, has been amazing about doing that. You can tell that in his visuals and stuff, he's supporting, local designers, local artists, local cinematographers. He's supporting people from South Africa specifically, and he gives a platform to South African musicians as well. He plays their music mostly. I would say 90% of his set was African or South African music. And he supports African voices, like the vocals are from, either they're in Zulu, or I recognize Swahili actually in some of the vocals that he was using. So I would say that that's something that we need to do for each other, right? We get excited when we get picked up on, if we're from Africa, like CNN or, I don't know, Netflix or Amazon Prime or something, and we just start going into that world. And we get agents here, and agents tell us, oh, well, you have to make yourself more your stuff more digestible to the American audience. And they start whitewashing our stuff, right? And before long, we're making the same stuff that Americans are making. We have to be careful not to get lost in that. We have to stay true to where we came from and remember to pull everybody with us. I think that's important. Yeah. And in future wise, where we're going to see a Netflix Africa. in the future. We're going to see YouTube Africa in the future. We have to start creating our own channels for that. We're going to see probably, you know, we have Nat Geo Africa, National Geographic Africa already. That's starting to happen now. And that's good and bad, because the minute you put Netflix Africa, are people in New York going to be sitting here tuning into Netflix Africa? Not necessarily, right? So again, you push the content back onto the continent. I don't think that should happen necessarily. And if there are people out there listening to this who are planning to do that, don't. Make your partnership with Netflix original, you know, put your content out there, and there's space for it. I mean, you can watch a Netflix show in Norwegian. I do. I like to watch the Norwegian Netflix shows because I have family in Norway and I'm trying to pick up the language and stuff like that. Or I'll watch something in Spanish and I'll read the subtitles. I watched a series in French. Which one was? Oh, Call My Agent, which was really great. And it was all in French, you know, and I love that show. And so you don't have a barrier. Don't think anymore that you have a barrier to putting your stuff out there because it's not good English or in English. You know, there's nothing holding you back now. The playing field is wide open, and if you're making something, get it out there in the world. Don't be scared. There's going to be eyeballs for it. I mean, you should see the crap my kids watch on YouTube, and these people are making stupid amounts of money, you know. If
Crazy.
those fools can do it, why not us? We really have something to say, something valid, something real, something with substance, right? And our kids need it. My kids need it, trust me.
I agree. That's really great advice. I envied Nigeria when they first started, because I was back home when Nollywood started. They'll do everything very local. They spoke their language in there, but now it's more everything English. And then South Africa still keeps it that way. They speak their language and we read the subtitles. I think that's beautiful.
Me too.
You're staying authentic to who we are, and not changing it because we want to try to fit in, which is great.
Yeah, I love that too. Kenya definitely. I mean, it's honestly, it's not.
Oh, Kenya as well.
fault.
I actually
we're very good with English, you know, and
Yeah.
we put a lot of our content out comes through in English, you know.
Yes. No, I actually recently watched a lot of Nairobi. I think it was a series that I was watching about a girl that got married, and right now I can't even remember the title, but she got married very young and she just couldn't deal with the arranged marriage.
Right.
This on Netflix, and it was really, really good. There's great actors in Africa. Like, I always knew this. There's so much talent back home, and it's just the matter of, I guess, highlighting each other, giving each other the spotlight. Once you make it, bring others in, like you said. It's actually really amazing. Pull each other up as we go.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's what it's about. That's what it comes down to. And you know, the world is going to sit up and take notice. Everyone's saying, oh, we have such good representation in the media now of Black voices, and you know, it's not just because there's one Black voice here and there, it's not enough. It's nowhere near representative of the population on this planet. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's out of, the ratio is completely out of whack. We need more, and there's space for more. There absolutely is. And there's an audience out here that also wants more. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. At this point in your life, I know I can go on to ask you so many questions. Before I actually ask you the last question, what are you working on aside from the travel, the running show? What else are you working on that we can support you?
I want to get a TV series picked up, basically, and I would love to produce a series in Africa. And the idea is that you represent Africa in a way that blows everybody's perceptions of it. So, for example, in Uganda, there's these little events and things that happen in Africa that the world doesn't know about that would blow their minds. So, for example, in Uganda, it's quite silly, but it's also really brilliant. There's something called the goat races. And every year people get together in Uganda to race goats. But it's done like the Royal Ascot, the British horse races. And people show up in the hats, in the famous hats, and you know, the big
No.
the outfits, and there's the champagne tent and all this kind of stuff. And they go and they bet on these goats and race them. And it's basically subverting colonial culture. And it's doing an FU to the British, you know? So there are these things that Africa does, that happens in Africa, that are hilarious and brilliant and just ingenious in some ways. And I think the world doesn't think about Africa that way, you know, and it doesn't look at Africa in terms of like, it's creative, it's beautiful, it's smart, you know, and Africa's also got solutions for us for many things. I would
Yeah.
like, you know, to also talk about Africa in terms of like how the rest of the world relies on it. Like, what would happen if the continent went away? Which systems on the planet would fail globally because Africa's gone away and disappeared, right? A lot. I mean, what about all the resources the rest of the planet relies on? Look at the cobalt that we're getting from the Congo, right? Take the cobalt away. What happens? All those electric cars are gone. And then we also have a cobalt that we're using, not cobalt, this lithium we're using in our phones for the chips and things like that in our computers. What happens there to the digital world if those resources disappear from Africa, right? What's the impact of on the planet? Because people don't think of Africa as supporting the rest of the planet. They think of, okay, we're throwing aid there and we're sending troops there and we're like, you know, helping them all the time. Well, like, why? And why you're still not doing enough, you know? So I think that there's space for a show like that represents Africa from her heart, her true heart. That's something
I
I
love
like.
that. I love that. I look forward to it, and I know it's going to happen. You have a lot of determination. You're
Thank
a New
you.
Yorker. Come on. You're a New
Yeah.
Yorker. We make things happen. That's what it is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and the blood
Do we
that
do we
oozes
have
in
a
you.
word for African New Yorkers? Like I know we got them from like New Yorkers, so they have like the Puerto Rican kind of word
Yes,
for it.
New
Do we have an
Yorker.
African New Yorker word? We need one, right?
We need one.
Yeah.
We need one. I think by anybody listening, if you have one, let's just send me a DM,
Yeah,
send
send it to
Preet a
us.
DM as well.
I'm not going to say one because it's going to sound terrible, but I'm sure there's better creative minds out there that have something for us.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. At this point in your life, have you found your concrete pastures?
I would say I'm still following them. Yes, I'm here, but there's still a hunger to do more and want to be more. And I think some of that comes from being a mom and taking a step back from my career, prioritizing, you know, raising my family. And now, as you know, they're getting older, so I'm going to be able to like jump into that a little more. I put things on the back burner. So just by virtue of like, you know, being a woman and having a family, I think things got slowed down a little bit. So I'm still wanting to go out there and make my mark and do things. But in terms of have I found myself and have I grown? Yes, I've grown here. You know, I've found myself in many ways. I've found what drives me, what makes me happy, what keeps me healthy. That's something that's really important, you know. And I've found balance in my life, which is really important too. Yeah.
I
What
love
about
that.
you? Have you found your concrete pastures?
I have. I have. So today when I sit down with you, my concrete pastures is this right here. The show, the podcast, being able to inspire, give insight to others, bring brilliant guests like yourself to be able to inspire the world. It gives me so much joy, it gives me so much fulfillment. I've been able to find myself. I went through so much headache, a painful heartbreak. So that gave me an opportunity to reconnect with myself. Because a lot of the times we lose ourselves when you are with the partner,
Yeah.
not to their fault, it's just how it happens. But I had to connect with Nancy. I had to connect with myself. And it's beautiful that I've actually been able to find my concrete passions in that way. I'm happy with my kids. And this amazing responsibility, it scares me, but every day gives me butterflies to be able to do it because it's a huge responsibility. I don't represent myself, I represent so many people.
And you're
So
doing a wonderful job of it. You're very good at getting people to, you know, bare their soul. You're like an Oprah in that
oh,
sense.
that's such a
When
huge
you
compliment.
started
Thank
out,
you
I
so
didn't think I was
much.
going to tell you everything that I told you, but it just flowed, you know. So you definitely are a muse in that sense.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's a huge compliment.
Yeah, and thank you
Yeah.
too, Nancy.
Thank you for being here. It's definitely an honor to have you. And thank you for all the work you're doing for all of us in the diaspora and for representing us this way. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today. And it's been an honor for me as well, honestly. Very grateful.
You are very welcome.